Good morning. All right, so let's see here. We're in Exodus 33. 33. All right, so Exodus 33, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I will give it. I'll send my angel before you. I'll drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, Perizzite, Hivite, Jebusite. Verse 3, go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, and I will not, and I will, for I will not go up in your midst, lest I consume you on the way, for you're a stiff-necked people." Amen to that. And when the people heard this bad news, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, "Say to the children of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. I could come up into your midst in one moment and consume you. Now therefore take off your ornaments that I may know what to do to you." So the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments by Mount Horeb. So they're going to depart from the wilderness of sin, the area around Sinai, and they're supposed to start heading up to the land. Now, we all know what's going to happen when they get there, but they don't know what's going to happen yet because they haven't read the book yet. So, but he's saying, man, because of the way you guys behaving, like I might just stay here on the mountain and let you guys go. And so they take off their ornaments, they take off their jewelry, and a lot of this is kind of a sign of mourning, right? They're sad. And so Moses goes back to meet with the Lord. And so verse 7, it says, Moses took his tent, pitched it outside the camp, far from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of meeting. And it came to pass that everyone who sought the Lord went out to the tabernacle of meeting, which was outside the camp. So it was, whenever Moses went out to the tabernacle, that all the people rose. Each man stood at his tent door and watched Moses until he had gone into the tabernacle. And it came to pass, when Moses entered the tabernacle, that the pillar of cloud descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. And the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose and worshipped, each man in his tent door. So the Lord spoke to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. And he would return to the camp, but his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tabernacle. And so what we see going on is Moses sets up his HQ. He's got headquarters, and he sets it off away from everyone else. And it gets confusing because there's the tabernacle of meeting, which is Moses's tent, and then there's the tabernacle, where the Ark of the Covenant was, the priests ministered, etc. Those are two different things, and that word tabernacle, right, it's more of a broad term, so it can get confusing a little bit as you're reading through Exodus and you see the word tabernacle. Which one are we talking about? But the most important thing is that God's presence would come there, and he would descend in that cloud, or by night the pillar of fire, right there at the door. And it talks about how God talked to Moses face to face. There is something unique about the relationship that God had with Moses. Now, most of us, we're not going to have that same face-to-face kind of experience. We have free access to come before the Lord and bring our petitions, right? To boldly approach the throne of grace, right? But it's not quite the same, right? As a cloud sitting outside our front door and God speaking to us out of that cloud, that pillar of cloud. But I think what's almost more interesting or worthwhile to notice is that here's this guy, Joshua, and Joshua would just hang out there. He did not depart from the tabernacle. And what I would propose is the people who are really seeking the Lord, who are really hungry for God. It's not about good people and bad people, good Christians and bad Christians. It's just about Christians who are authentically hungry for the Word of God, for the God of the Word. They seem to hang out at the tabernacle. Now, God's everywhere. We know that. And we can pray to God in our prayer closet, in secret or in public. But there is something about gathering together with God's people and how God seems to show up when we do so. You know, we often quote the where two or more are gathered, that I'm there in the midst. And, you know, there's an interesting context to that passage, but it points us, at least in the direction of understanding that God is uniquely present. Not that he's not present elsewhere, but he's uniquely present when believers gather together to seek his face. And so what you find is, you know, there's that old saying, you know, the church isn't a building, right? The church is the people. And that's totally true. And something I like to remind us is that I am not the church. We make the church. Sometimes people say, well, it's not the building, it's the people, because they're looking for an excuse to avoid the building. But the problem is ecclesia, ek, is out, leaving, outward, going away from, is the word ek. And Lasia is a gathering. So when we take these two words, put them together, it's gathering out together. And so I am not the church, and you are not the church. But when we gather, now we're the church. And what young Joshua wanted to do is he wanted to be where God was. And we find that, again, God does uniquely show up when we gather together at our little tabernacles, our buildings, the places that we go to meet. And so, like Joshua, he did not depart from the tabernacle. And you know, there are some people I know that it almost doesn't matter what church service it is, they're there. They're always there. You know, it's one of those things where if it's a man, they're at men's Bible study. If they're a woman, they're at women's Bible study. If they speak Spanish, they're at the Spanish Bible study. If they're a youth, they're at the youth study. If they can breathe, they're at the prayer meeting. And it's like they're at everything. Why? Well, it's because they're really hungry. They really want to be where God's at. They want to be where the action is. And so you'll find that people like Joshua, they don't depart. They want to get there as much as they can. Now, reality, right? Reality is we have jobs and we have children and we have other responsibilities that make us unable to maybe go to every church service. Some people have much more flexible sections. Joshua might have been a single guy, right? You know, when you're young and single, those are often the people I see at every church service because they don't have any other obligations pulling on their lives. But it's kind of like a two-sided coin or something here. While on one side, we know that family, work, and other responsibilities that God has entrusted us with, it may keep us from some of the services. You know, on the flip side, there's probably a whole lot of other opportunities for us to gather together where we just might miss them. But a great sign. You ask me, show me someone who's on fire for the Lord and excited about the Lord, and I will point to you at someone who doesn't ever leave the tabernacle. They show up early. They often stay late. They're at the morning service and the night service and the midweek service. They're the ones who are just wherever God's at, that's where I want to be. And I'll tell you one last thing, because I do think that that is a sign of spiritual health. I also think that's often the road to spiritual health. And Satan knows that too. And so quite often, the very thing that brings us to spiritual health and often displays that we have spiritual health, well, it's the very same thing that Satan would do anything to keep you from. And so, if you ever want a good excuse to skip church, Just ask, and Satan will give you one. He'll give you two, he'll give you three. There's always a good excuse. You know, there's that story about Bob, where Bob is saying to his wife, I don't want to go to church today. And she's like, honey, you need to go. He's like, but no, I don't think anyone there even likes me. And she's like, Bob, but you know you need to go. And Bob says, no, I don't even like anyone there. Bob, you need to go. But honey, it's like we've been going and I don't think anything's changing and I don't see the point anymore. She says, Bob, you need to go. And he says, honey, I just don't think I can go today. And his wife says, Bob, you're the pastor. You need to go. So, just joking around. Point is that yes, we all need to go. And we need to be getting that regular fellowship in. And I will say this last one, and it's funny because we're doing it at an online Bible study, right? Here we are in an online Bible study because it's great to get the extra fill, right? This is a great extra fill, but I will say, especially since COVID, right? Ever since this became so normal that for some maybe it's become a little too normal. And there's a lot of people who've just gotten used to watching online and, oh, I'll just watch online. But that's not the church. Just again, we gather. And oh, yes, there are people who are stuck in bed, people who are ill. There's a whole lot of reasons why it's great that we have online church so people can gather with us. But again, when that becomes the norm, I'm just going to skip this because I know I can just watch online. There's no fellowship. There's no accountability. At our church, you miss the worship. You miss everything else. We only stream the live stream, and there's a reason for that. Not only is it a headache having to deal with it's not easy streaming worship. There's a lot of extra work to make it not sound really funky. But it is. Come to church for the fellowship. Come to church for the accountability. Come to church for the sharpening and the prayer and the love. So, be like Joshua. Don't depart from the tabernacle. If there's an opportunity for you to gather with God's people, do it. All right. God bless you guys. I've got to send my family off. They're headed to the church. Go figure. Time for homeschool day at the church. All right. God bless you guys. Take care. And I will see you guys tomorrow.